can you give us some kind of insight into what type of nuclear weapons are moving into Belarusian territory?
What President Putin has said is that they will be air-delivered bombs to be put on aircraft that have been especially configured to carry nuclear weapons. And he has claimed that those will be airplanes flown by Belarusian pilots, although I think one has to be skeptical that Russia would ever allow Belarusian pilots to fly airplanes with nuclear weapons, because the Belarusian pilots could fly them in reverse toward Russia.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, what do we know about the expertise of the Belarusian authorities to actually mine this kind of weapon?
President Lukashenko has agreed, evidently, for this to happen. President Putin is probably, particularly because the Russian forces have not done so well in Ukraine, President Putin probably is trying to do this as a way to scare Ukraine and scare the West from continuing to support the armed opposition to Russian forces in Ukraine. But it's unlikely to work. President Putin's past nuclear threats, and he's made them often, have not caused the West to reduce its support of Ukraine. In fact, that support continues to increase.
What do we know about the relationship, well, the detailed relationship actually between Russia and Belarus? Of course, they are strong allies. Belarus is often known as Europe's last dictatorship. Is that relationship between the two countries one where Belarus will simply accept anything that Russia really asks of it?
That is closer to reality now. But for years, Belarus resisted Russia's pressure to allow Russia to put an air base in Belarus. And that was at the time when President Lukashenko evidently thought he had more support for his leadership in Belarus. In the summer of 2020, though, very large-scale protests, peaceful protests, broke out against against Lukashenko in Belarus, and those probably came as a shock to Lukashenko and to the Kremlin. So since then, Lukashenko has been more beholden to the Kremlin because he realizes the importance of Kremlin support for his maintaining his political position in Belarus.
William, can you kind of give us an idea of life inside Belarus? Of course, 2020 and 2021, deep in the COVID years, saw arrests of multiple protesters and claims of human rights abuses. Has anything changed under Alexander Lukashenko?
No, the system has, in fact, become more and more repressive, just as Russia's system also has become more and more repressive. Both in the case of Russia and Belarus, they have never been more repressive than at any time in the last 30 years since they gained modern independence.
And last year, of course, President Alexander Lukashenko supported Russia's and Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, offering Belarus as a launch pad for Russian troops to cross over into Ukraine, allowing Russian warplanes to carry strikes from Belarusian soil. Has that agreement, that level of flexibility of the agreement within the two countries just continued, or is there any tension there?
That appears to have continued. What has not happened is that Belarusian forces, troops, have not joined Russian troops in the invasion of Ukraine. And that probably is because of very high resistance in Belarus and in the Belarusian military, and concern probably by Russians as well as Belarusian leaders that those troops may not be loyal to Lukashenko's government if they were to engage in that, let's say, coordinated invasion of Ukraine.
We hear of pressure, don't we, on Putin, William, from within his own circle, and the idea that the end of the Putin regime would have to come from within the political establishment of his own party in Moscow. Do we think that we are any closer to the end of the Alexander Lukashenko regime, because his health has been questioned recently, hasn't it?
Yes, his health has been questioned recently. It is too difficult to predict whether or how regime change would occur in Moscow or Minsk in Belarus. These things have not been accurately predicted in the past. In the West, we did not predict when the Berlin Wall would fall in 1989 or the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. But what we can say is that stresses on the leadership in both Russia and Belarus are greater now than they've been at any time. And the possibility of regime change, which a few years ago, a lot of people said, well, that wouldn't happen. It couldn't happen. Now people are understanding that those stresses may be greater. In Russia, of course, the dramatic example is that the head of this Wagner group, Prigozhin, has been directly criticizing not only the Russian military leadership, but now recently, apparently, President Putin.